everyone that's based in the observatory. Thanks very much for offering to do this. Thanks, Joyful, for bringing everyone together. Hope it'll be a really cool discussion.
Yes,
everyone's always super interested in this topic. So thanks very much. We appreciate you guys being here.
With that said, I'm going to start admitting people.
Just before you then, we are live on YouTube.
Okay, cool. You were saying, no?
I'm going to send you the link for the podcast that he did as well again later in the session, just so you can go
I'm not connected to it.
I'll send it wrong.
Yeah, unless you're enjoying this in the meantime. In my head, everyone. So it is 12 p.m. in South African time. Different time zones will have either morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our May Astro4Dev Full Moon Mashup. We've had 3 so far, all been very fascinating, very interesting. So this month we will be talking about the intersection between astronomy and mental health. I think this is one of the projects that we have at the OED that always attracts people, and it's always interesting because people view it differently. They have different insights into how astronomy and mental health connect, or the fact that there is such a thing as a connection between astronomy and mental health. So this month we will try to do something a slightly bit different. We will try to almost kind of co-create a project that incorporates astronomy and mental health, and we'll see how far we can get with it. And hopefully it will be something that the OED will be able to implement, or someone within the conversation will be able to say, I'm willing to do it in my respective country, area, or place where they are located. So without wasting any time, I would like for Dominic to give us a bit of background on our Astronomy for Mental Health project. And then also, if you can just give an overview of the OED, but I feel like people are really familiar with it. So a slight overview of the OED and then a bit more information on the Astronomy for Mental Health flagship project.
Thanks, Joy. So I'll try and keep it short. The OAD, we're looking at how astronomy can benefit society. So we're not advancing astronomy itself. We're trying to see how astronomy can benefit everyone else. And talking about the astronomy for mental health, we like to see how all these various aspects of astronomy, the night sky, these beautiful constellations, and just these big concepts of how small we are, our space in the universe, how all of those things can be used to be grounding moments and times for people to more clearly identify what are the challenges that they're facing, what are the resources they have available, and what is the path they can take to try and work through that. So in that way, it's how all of these astronomy activities and various things can be used to improve the mental health and well-being of everyone.
And with that said, you can also introduce.
Yes. So today we've got Christopher Barnes, a chartered psychologist, and Mark Westmaket, an astronomer and now mindfulness practitioner. And they will be introducing themselves a bit more, and we're very thankful that you guys were able to join us. Chris, would you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks very much for the invite. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. So my name's Dr. Chris Barnes. I'm based here in the UK, and the work that I do is largely based in the Nature Connectedness Research Group. I'm a developmental psychologist by training, and I've worked in lots of different clinical environments, but in the last 10 years or so, my work really has started to align about connection to the natural world, and more specifically now connection to the natural world at night and the benefit of things like astronomy for mental health. So really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thanks, Chris. And Mark?
Yeah, hi. My name is Dr. Mark Westmaket, and my background, I did a PhD in astrophysics. I ended up working for about 10 years doing research in astronomy, but then for various reasons I decided to shift gears, and then I took up teaching yoga and mindfulness as a job, and then gradually over the last I don't know however many years been starting to bring together these two worlds in precisely the way that we've been talking about, and we're going to be talking about later today. Trying to find the link between science, astrophysics, cosmology, the whole universe, and then what that means to us as a human and how that matters to us, and looking about connecting with what's going on inside in our inner universe, you could say, to our outer universe.
Yeah. So to start off, I've got a question that we can use to kick off the conversation, and it is, how do you both think astronomy can foster calm, curiosity, and resilience?
After you, Mark.
Well, gosh, okay. Yeah. So I think I see it in two different ways, right? So you can look at the stars, you can look at the night sky in a mindset which is about facts and figures and wanting to know, and then worrying that you don't know, and very kind of caught up in the knowledge dimension of things. And I see and I speak to people who do that all the time. They get their telescope out into their back garden, and it's all about like taking the right photograph and worrying that the conditions aren't good enough, and all that, that those kind of data driven stuff. And I was like this also as a professional astronomer, very, very caught up in all the numbers and having to publish papers and all that kind of stuff. And I think that leads away from all of those three things that you talked about, that you mentioned there: calm and resilience and openness. So I think we can switch our way of perceiving into a different way, which is much less about doing and understanding. It's more about being and perceiving. So we can go and look at the night sky in this mind of, wow, isn't it amazing? Isn't it so beautiful? And and if you listen to the sounds of the night sky, and you're looking and feeling what it's like to be, lying down on this blanket, or, craning my head and feeling a bit uncomfortable in my head, we're just kind of in the present moment, here and now. And that can take us into a place of, well, if we've got curiosity leads to wonder, and wonder leads very much to an awe. And I think it's in that connection between curiosity, wonder, and awe that we develop calm, more of a sense of connection, and the resilience comes eventually, as a sort of long-term effect, I suppose, of doing it more like that.
Yeah, and I add to that, and I completely agree with all of that sentiment. And I know anecdotally, I got into astronomy relatively recently as a hobby, and you're so right. I think that sometimes when you're outside, you're so focused on the technicalities of taking an astrophotography picture, it takes you away from noticing what's around you. And part of the work that I do around nature connectedness is reinforcing the idea that people need to stop, take a moment, check in with their surroundings and notice nature. And I guess in this sense, it's also noticing the beauty of the night sky, and kind of that links into some of the theory around connection to the natural world. One of the ones that I use is around the pathways to nature connection, and it's around the senses, which you mentioned, Mark. Kind of in the daytime, obviously, it's listening to bird song and things like that. And depending on geographically where in your world you are, it might be listening to owls hoot or a fox's call, and really just taking a moment to not just notice the beauty of the night sky, but also kind of the wider natural environment that might be around you, obviously dependent on sort of where you live.
I think that leads nicely into, you both mentioned some ideas, but what would you say are some of the main ideas that come to mind when you're thinking about ideas for prompting mental health through astronomy?
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yes, so you said, if I heard you correctly, Dominic, you said prompting ideas for connecting astronomy with mental health. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so that is kind of around some of the work that I've just started to do, and kind of drawing that connection. I'm more widely looking at the natural world at night, but it most definitely includes the night sky. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is the simple activities that people can do to help them feel that sense of connection, to benefit from the restorative and the relaxing and the calming effect of being in the natural world at night. And I do both qualitative and quantitative work. So I interview and I speak to people right from around the world, and I also kind of collect survey data and numbers and things like that. And the most recent publication I have in that area specifically looked at those people who are astronomers and identify as that, and those that not really astronomers, but might have a general kind of interest in that. And the really interesting statistical finding out of it was that astronomers, not too surprisingly, seem to have a deeper connection to the natural world at night, and particularly to the night sky. But not only that, statistically, in the measures that we took, astronomers had better well-being and happiness as a result of that. So it's really interesting to see that there are benefits when we encourage and we do simple activities, not always complex interventions, but actually very simple everyday things can be just as meaningful and just as effective.
Do you think, are they amateur astronomers or professional astronomers?
So there was a real broad range in how we assess that, and so the definition was wide enough that it would incorporate, you know, the hard end of astronomy, where they might do it for a living and they might be in a particular astronomical site or observatory, to those that were more hobbyist and astronomy like. So we had quite a range and a spectrum of people, and I talk about that a little bit in the paper. And likewise, we asked, how often do you go out under the night sky? So they might be an astronomer, but they might only go out, I don't know, once every couple of months or so. In the UK, it's a little bit different because we've got lots of clouds, and you really have to pick your moment, don't you? I think to be able to take advantage of the night sky.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I think I always used to think was as a professional astronomer, I'd come to my desk, and if I was to actually think about what I was doing, then my mind would be blown like every day. It'd be blown to the point where I couldn't actually function, couldn't actually do anything, because I've got on my screen, I've got data from a galaxy that's 46 million light years away. It's 2 times the size of our Milky Way, and we're looking at millions and millions of stars all together. And you just be like, wow, that's amazing. So I thought as a professional astronomer, we basically had to numb ourselves to the mind-blowing reality of what you're doing, so that it's not like 6 billion, it's 6. That's what astronomers are very, very good at, making up new units which make things more you can cope with it a bit easier, like all these weird things like parsecs and kiloparsecs and things just makes it easier. So I think there's something there around, as an astronomer, if you're in that mindset where you're numbing yourself, to the reality of what you're doing, I wonder how that connects into this connection between going out and looking at the stars and mental health, and whether you really need to be considering the enormity, the vastness, and actually holding that in your awareness as you look at this, whether that's important.
Yeah, I'm not sure it answers that question, but some of the work in the area around knowledge and knowing seems to be less consequential in terms of affecting people's connection and well-being. So it's not always that encouraging people in the pursuit of knowledge and knowing is actually the beneficial factor that's going on. It's the experiential element of it that seems to play the most key element of these things. And so we often sort of use this term within the academic literature around tuning into nature. I think it can obviously be applied to the night sky as well, and it's kind of being in the zone. And you know, when I reflect on people I've either spoken to or actually when I'm doing my own astronomy, and I've got astrophotography and a Dobsonian for visual, they're very different experiences, aren't they? Kind of, I think when you're doing that, and you can really be brought into things. I like my Dobsonian for the very reason that I feel sucked in to kind of the universe when I'm looking at it. So it's less about the technicalities of setting up and producing a photograph, and it's more about like I'm actively noticing nature through the lens of my telescope, and I think it's that dimension, at least for me, research wise and personally, that aids that connection.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and yeah, right. I mean, I love that. I've never actually owned a telescope myself, and I got a kind of fix of my looking through telescopes when I was working in astronomy. I never really felt, and I feel like now, for me, it's about looking up with my eyes. I get sucked in, you know, just like looking up with my eyes. But yeah, I wonder if there's something there around, because you mentioned being in the UK and or people live in places where there is more cloud and it's maybe less accessible looking up at directly at the stars, whether there's something there around contemplating our space within the universe that can happen regardless of whether we're looking up at the stars or not. You know, maybe like closing your eyes and imagining all the life that's around us and the trees and the wind and things like that. We can do that with the universe as well.
Yeah, I wonder, well, maybe to also help for the other participants from both of your experiences, and for Mark also having gone through a lot of these activities where you lead participants into different ways of viewing the night sky and the environment. What would you think is useful things to keep in mind or to try, almost like priming for going into these type of activities?
I think the most important fundamental mindset that I always try to get people is basically stepping out of their thought world and into the more experiencing world. So however you want to do that, mindfulness I find is a very, very powerful technique. So I'd usually start my events with a 10-minute, 15-minute mindfulness practice where we're just noticing the breath, noticing sensations, and trying to get more into that space of just experiencing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd actually add to that. Mindfulness, kind of, I've done a little bit of work on, and I'm currently working with some forest bathing practitioners. So, you know, that might align to your work, Mark.
Very much, yeah, very much. Yeah.
And so there are obviously mindfulness-based practices, as you've kind of just outlined, as part of that. And what we try to do as part of a kind of a more recent study is do it at night and do forest bathing activities during the night. And there's lots of people that I'm aware of are kind of doing very similar things, and we're trying to evaluate kind of the effects that then being out at night will involve. And it's actually I find, and maybe you also find this as well, sometimes the experiences, the sensations are intensified in some ways at night. So it depends obviously on what time of night and maybe the temperature and kind of the location of where you are and whether you're on your own or with a small group. But your hearing becomes more acutely kind of enhanced, I think, and the vision, at least once you're night sky adapted, kind of allows you to sort of see the stars and the moon and the Milky Way, maybe if it's out. So I think there's something about the absorption when you kind of in that sense. But yes, it's sort of relaxing and noticing breath and just being calm, ready to enter that kind of very personal state of your internal universe, as you put it, Mark, and the external universe that's in front of you.
Yeah, and I think throughout the millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years that we've evolved on this planet, we would have been so much more in connection with the nighttime. You know, people would have been living more outside. There would have been much more outside at the nighttime, because of course when it gets dark, if you either you stop doing something or you just have to make do with the darkness. And well, nowadays we live in a world where we don't have to ever be in the dark, and of course we go outside and often it isn't actually that dark outside because of all the light pollution, so we don't really get a chance to really be in the dark. And maybe it's about what you just mentioned there as connecting us to something that's very, I don't know, deeply rooted in our humanity, about being out in the dark.
Yes. Yeah. I agree, and I think that obviously light pollution is a huge issue, and it's an issue that's growing. And we know that 80% of the world is light polluted, and across Europe, it's 99% live under sky glow, and very few of us actually live under these pristine dark skies as our ancestors not too long ago would have naturally experienced. And I always feel like we've lost something really special in that sense. Of course, maybe we're living more indoors than we are experiencing that outdoors, but we don't have the same access, which is maybe prohibitive to that connection.
Maybe we can also hear from other people, because I'm guessing we have a lot of people who are either from the astronomy space or outside of astronomy, but they have an interest in astronomy and how the two can link. So while we let the participants in the audience sort of kind of like think of how they see astronomy and mental health connecting, I actually have a question mostly to Ram, because you've been working with the projects for a while. So when we came up with the theme for the the flagship project for astronomy for mental health, this was obviously guided by some of the projects that we had funded that sort of kind of relate to that, right? So like, what kind of projects were they doing that sort of kind of made it seem like it would be a good idea to sort of kind of have the OED focus on the project itself?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So I think initially the theme was much broader. So it was more along the lines of how astronomy can be some sort of tool to celebrate our shared heritage, and a couple of projects were working with specific populations such as refugees or people from disadvantaged areas, and they applied astronomy as a way to sort of expand the world of people, especially kids living in refugee camps, who for them that world is sort of normal because they grew up there, especially those who live long term in refugee camps. So they used astronomy as a way to expand their horizons, and also in some cases sort of bring some solace to the kids. Actually, one of the projects went in together with psychologists and counselors because many of these kids in the camps, obviously, they had very traumatic experiences, and they were quite young. Some of them are very young. So they did some counseling sessions in the beginning, and then they did stargazing and brought in astronomy as a way to help them see how we are all connected. Yeah, so I don't think there was any specific measurements done on what impact this experience had on the kids. So this was still, I think, an early pilot for this idea. And then we had someone at the OED who did some background research into how experiences in nature can have a positive impact on mental health, and that led to the whole astronomy for mental health angle.
Okay, well then I guess my question to everyone is then how do we then sort of kind of like, basically the example that Ram gave, how do we then create something similar to that where it's actually, because it almost feels like with the research aspect of it, there's still some sort of gap between the everyday person and, like certain people will be part of the research. And then same thing with the mindfulness as well. You'd have to go out and seek out this services that are being offered to people. But then how do we then sort of kind of create something that anyone can have access to and be able to sort of kind of engage in it, and then also get the benefits of, astronomy and then mental well-being as well.
So the two sides of making it accessible, but also making it like very public in the discourse and things that people will just be like, oh, this is something we do, and they can just share it around.
Yes, and I'm happy to hear everyone's thoughts on that, as well as like what ideas people would have in terms of how do we make it such an easily accessible thing where we don't have to, like, for example, you've had pilot projects, but then again, how would we scale this and make it that anyone from anywhere can do it without you being involved.
Yeah, so this is open for our speakers, for the audience. You guys also welcome to type in the chat if you have any ideas.
Yeah, and based on your experiences as well, if like maybe you were like in an outreach space, how would you then see, because you engage with a lot of people, how would it make it easier for it to be something that is implemented or to be engaged with other people, and they can also take something out of it and be able to do it with others as well?
Well, one thing that comes up straight away for me is that when you talk to kids and parents, often the parents are reluctant to take their kids out stargazing because they feel like they don't know enough. They don't know enough constellations. They don't know what they're looking at. The kid's going to ask some questions that they have absolutely no idea how to answer. And the thing is, what I always try to tell them is that, well, we don't know. There's so many questions. Why don't you just go out and wonder together? You know, like, or write down the questions together and look them up later. Or just like, you don't need to know anything about a forest to go to the forest and enjoy being in the forest. And that's the same thing. You don't need to know anything about the night sky. You don't need to know anything about constellations to go outside and just enjoy being outside. And especially if you can find a way of being feeling safe, being outside in the dark. Yeah. So, I mean, I think just like helping people to understand they don't need to know any facts to actually appreciate the beauty of it.
Yeah, I'd add to that, and I'd say I wanted to make, I guess, 2 points, and I think it's absolutely right to make something like this accessible as possible to anyone, because I always have a worry that, you know, some aspects of astronomy rely on you being able to buy certain equipment, you know, even when, you know, some of it might still be relatively cheap, but for some people and with cost of living, it can be quite difficult for them to still gain access to the same extent. So I think accessibility, doing activities which are freely accessible that anyone can do with minimal or no equipment, is probably one of the key drivers that I like to at least consider when I'm putting together projects, that people can carry it with them onwards. So affordability, and also that sometimes, I mean, certainly within the UK, there's very few dark sky sites that people can go to, and it becomes about affordability in that sense. So sometimes you can't always access it from where you live. If you're living in city centre London, then there's very little chance you'll see much other than the moon and maybe the planets, which you might mistake as well.
That's where I am right now, exactly. For 10 stars on a good night. Yeah.
Exactly. And you know, when we could have access to thousands, and potentially anyway, and at least the Milky Way and things like that. So it's finding natural occurrences that draw people in. And what we've noticed, at least in the UK, is that there were natural phenomena and events that previously, at least I can't remember it in my lifetime, the Northern Lights. See, we seem to go through a spate of that in the last 12 months or so. And it was in the media, it was in the news, and so many people were just going out and trying to get a snap with a smartphone or you know, a digital DSLR camera. So I think it's piggybacking on these natural, awe-inspiring, wonderful moments that we can then share and create, and I say, you know, share with photography through our WhatsApp groups, posting on Facebook, or whatever it happens to be. And I think that's really important. And if I still have time, I probably would just mention that we've just been completing a big study called Generation Green 2 here in the UK, and it's government funded, and it's aimed at recruiting 25,000 children from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. And it might be their first ever kind of visit out into a natural environment, like a natural landscape, and getting away from the city, or just being able to access these things, because they often have a cost with them. And we recruited up to 1,000 children as part of that. And we measured night sky connection, as well as their well-being and environmental concern over time, sort of before and after either a residential day trip or one where they were spending multiple nights underneath the stars. So the specific aim was to give them night sky activities. So it included some astronomy, stargazing more broadly, even roasting marshmallows on an open pit, just being under the night sky for hours upon end, because we don't necessarily always have availability of space that's safe and accessible, and the kind of quality skies. And although we've not published that work yet, we're just at the stage of writing up. We have found two things. One is about night sky connection and how it changes from before to after the events, and then 3 months later after the events, and also their well-being too. So maybe you can already tell what I'm going to say, but by comparison to sort of the children who went on just day trips to those that spent a night under the stars, we found that connection was greatly increased in the short term, but also 3 months later, we were still measuring the same effects. So it stayed with them. These events are monumental, if we take children in these residential settings. And the same was actually for the well-being too, is that we saw that it increased from before to immediately after the event. And then 3 months later, there will be being it actually increased by a couple of points up on the scales that we used. And there might be all sorts of reasons that kind of help explain that. But I would like to think that part of that is that we've given them the tools and the activities, not the knowledge, but just the enthusiasm and the passion to go, wow, to their families when they got home. I did this amazing things. We went out for a night sky walk, and they might think, oh, well, I'll join mum and dad on a walk with the dog, and we'll see what we can see in the night sky. So these little things could really have massive impact. Anyway, sorry, I thought I'd share that with you.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely loads and loads of stuff that you can do that with no equipment or technology. I always like to get to people to feel the sense of gravity. So I've just finished writing this book. It's going to be called, it's a kid's book about mindful stargazing and contemplating our space. And it's going to be called Look Up at Bedtime. It's out next year. And it's now with the illustrator. It's going to look, I think it's going to look very beautiful. But the first practice is getting kids to lie down in bed, because it's a bedtime book. Lie down in bed and make yourself really, really heavy, and then notice which parts of your body feel heaviest on the bed, and then that gets you into the sense of, well, this is gravity. Gravity is pulling you downwards, and because we can feel gravity means we can feel our planet, and our planet is vast, and it's creating this kind of gravity which is pulling you down. And not only is it pulling you towards it, but actually because your body has is a size, it's also creating a very small amount of gravity, which is pulling the planet to you. So we have this relationship. You're in a relationship with gravity, and it's so simple. You can just lie there and just feel it and be like, oh my gosh, I can actually feel the planet beneath me, and then hopefully get to go to sleep at that point.
But Kevin, you have a hand up?
Well, unless there's any other.
I was going to ask if we have any hands in the audience, or if someone would like to share in the audience. I guess you're part of the audience.
Can I ask Mark and Chris, what are the potential? I mean, all these sound great, and I think many of us can relate to being out in nature under the night sky. But from your experience and research, what are the potential negative consequences that could arise from someone being out in the night sky? Because there are sort of some phobias and stuff related to this, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Would you like to go first?
Well, I mean, I'm sure for both of us, we've got things springing up. Yeah, I think to me, it seems the important thing is the safety. Like lots of people say, I want to be out, I want to go outside, but I just don't feel safe. And then it's a question of having organized groups and having someone making sure the space is good and things. And then I can make a world of difference. Like we did a stargazing event in one of the parks here in London, which is open at the night time. And someone said, I'd never, ever go to the park in the night time myself, but we were in a group and we were being led and felt much safer. And that was really quite a magical moment. And then the other thing was that some people get this, I've experienced, some people get the sense, when I look up, I just feel tiny, insignificant, and I feel like a vanishingly unimportant person, always to the point where it's oppressive. I just feel completely tiny. What's the point of it all? And then, I mean, then I would typically try to change it round and say, wow, I mean, the opportunity to witness a star in the night sky, your life is maximum 80, 90 years on this planet. That star's been in existence for millions and millions and millions of years, and you're just witnessing it once. That makes it a very special moment. That is anything but insignificant. I mean, for example, yeah, yeah, but I'm sure there's some others. Do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I'd kind of add to that. Of course, I completely agree. Probably number one factor is safety, isn't it? Because we don't all have that opportunity. I'm working with a colleague in India at the moment, and she said after 6 o'clock, there's no way that I'm going to go outside. You know, she's based within a compound, but actually then it becomes completely about safety, and it just depends on geographically perhaps where we're located in the world. So I think that's probably the paramount thing. I'd also say it's about opportunity and accessibility. So knowing where to go is kind of not necessarily a negative, but it's a challenge and it's a barrier to getting people out. If we, in the daytime, we'd probably think nothing of, say, I'm going to go for a walk in the forest or over a field or wherever it happens to be. But more often at night, depending on what time it is, you might not say, I'm just going to go for a walk and walk around particular areas. So it's not in the mindset of most people to do that. Maybe unless you have a pet like a dog that you might need to take for walks at night or something like that. But it's about opportunity and purpose and knowing where to go and knowing what to do. And I think knowing how to access the night sky in those particular ways. So that I think that's perhaps a real challenge is knowing things that you can do for free at any point, and that it can be accessed in any way. So maybe you live on the 8th floor of an apartment in a city centre, and what does the night sky then look like for you? It's because you could go out on your balcony. You might be able to take a pair of little binoculars and maybe pick up the moons of Saturn, or well, maybe not Saturn, but Jupiter, perhaps, or the craters on the moon. And I think it's about those things. So I think I'd largely concur with it to say I think safety is the predominant number one negative.
I hope you also mentioned groups. What would you recommend for people that might want to start trying some of these activities as an individual, and then compared to as a group? And then do you think that there's a big benefit in doing it as a group compared to doing it as an individual?
So if you don't mind me going first, I would kind of say I think there's benefits of both. And lots of the people that I speak to, and even actually if I consider myself, sometimes when I'm out on my own and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and it's completely dark and I've got kind of a forest right next to me, which you could probably just about see. And so I hear lots of things kind of rustling, but it's a very personal kind of moment when I'm on my own, and it feels wonderful. And the reason why it feels wonderful is because I could hear a pin drop. I could, any kind of noise from any local roads is gone. So it's a very intimate moment, I think, when you're own. And I get a lot from that restoratively, and I find it so relaxing. I'm not scared in my back garden. It's surrounded by walls and fences and things like that. So, but even when I'm out in the middle of a field somewhere, I personally don't feel kind of concern there. So then I think the group dynamic offers a different thing. It offers people safety in numbers. It offers them a clear purpose of what they're kind of going out to. But one thing we've maybe not mentioned as much is around a social connection that they can kind of gain from that. And there's something wonderful, not even having a knowledgeable expert kind of with you, but just being able to share in a moment with someone, I think is really important. And you can talk about it later. You can share those moments with others. So I think there's probably benefits of both of those things.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think there's
especially if it's a group of single people.
Date astronomy dating.
There's a new business. Can I just throw something out there? I think this is really great. What I was trying to get at as well, my question, many, I mean, I saw some of the people in the audience, but like many of us in the room here, will come from rural communities. When we talk about the mental health challenges around the world, people in rural communities, sometimes in places that are sort of economically, not as well off as the cities and so on. So such communities live with the stars. I grew up, having this access to the stars all the time. But still we had so much stress and anxiety over food and monthly income and things like that. Like how, in a very practical way, do you think that these sort of ideas can be implemented with a community level? I mean, where poverty is a challenge, unemployment is a challenge, and you say, well, look at the sky, and someone might say, well, I've got the sky all the time, doesn't put food on my table, or doesn't help with the worry. That I don't know. How would you approach a community like that?
Well, I mean, I suppose the question, like you say, like, why the hell am I interested in the stars when I'm really worried about what I'm going to put on my plate to eat? Yeah. I think contemplating our relationship with the nature, being around, looking and sensing and feeling nature helps in some way to put our worries into perspective. Like, it's not going to say that that the worries are not important, but if I see the worries that I have directly in my life in the scale of I'm living as a human on this planet as part of this ecosystem, which is continuing, the ecosystem expands around the entire world, and the world, our planet, exists as a ball of rock in space orbiting the sun, one among millions and millions of others in the whole universe. And it's like, oh, on that scale, then what I'm worrying about, it takes a different sort of, I don't know, perspective. Although I appreciate that I'm speaking from a place of white middle class, having never experienced worries about putting food on my plate, and I probably maybe not the ideal person to speak about this, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add to that. I think definitely when I've spoken to people as part of the research that I've done, and I've been interviewing people, that has really come through what you just said, Mark, about kind of puts my worries into place. And of course, it reflects just the opinions of those that I collected, which often are not from Indigenous or First Nation communities, and maybe experience the night and nature at night in kind of different ways and different heritages. But it does echo lots of the same sentiment that I've always found. It's either small self in a very big universe, or I'm part of this same big universe, and kind of that perspective puts sometimes the everyday worries and concerns into place. Now, I'm not saying it would be a cure for absolutely everything. Of course, it wouldn't, especially if it's struggling to put kind of food on the table. But also there's an element, I thought, which is about accessibility of the night sky. And when you do live in quite maybe a remote area where you do have no trouble seeing the night sky every day, I wonder to what extent it becomes almost a complacency, because you sort of you have access to it every day. It's no big deal. I was in London from where I live, near Derbyshire, just the other day, which is about 150 miles away. And I was in St James's Park, right near Buckingham Palace, and some these green birds were there, really unusual for where I live. They were ring-nosed parakeets. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And so I got to my meeting, and I was like, I was seeing these birds. And they said, oh, I know, we're all a bit fed up with them. They're always making this noise and racket around. And I guess the point I'm kind of making is sometimes the everyday to one person, and it's just a usual occurrence, is an awe-inspiring and wonderful moment for another. And so sometimes it's really difficult to draw these inferences and comparisons between people that regularly have access and maybe don't do the same things as others.
Yeah, we have a hand from Tony. Maybe you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, we'll do Lera and then we'll do Genevieve.
Well, there's an interesting comment here from Genevieve. I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and let's maybe do Genevieve's question, and then we can Lera afterwards. You can unmute if you want. Lera, if you're unmuted, you can ask your question first.
Go ahead.
Okay, I wasn't asking a question as much, but maybe first comment, then I'll ask a question. But Kevin's question about the rural areas and maybe people not so privileged, who's, as you say, have the night sky right there in front of them to awe at. Maybe in that case, you might turn the thing around. And I mean, this conversation started talking about how some of the more privileged people obsessed with data and things like that. And in this case, for the rural or less privileged, one might use the astronomy part to, to engage them more about that they don't have, have a lot of access to, such as the data part and the technical part, the logical issues that one can gain from astronomy. So simple things such as timekeeping, for example, you can engage aspects from astronomy about timekeeping, things to do with direction, that how one can use the stars for direction. And even numerical things like, imagine them counting the actual particular stars and so forth, and then hope that these kind of lessons, they can then apply to other problem-solving things that they may need to encounter. So in this case, you are doing well-being with actually like some technical grounding supporting the well-being rather than just awe. But I think it's astronomy is also very, very relevant to those people. You just need a different angle to that. Okay, and then if I were to ask my questions, I sort of have two to both of the speakers. The book about the gravity and then the activities with the group, at the retreat or something. I was wondering what age group that is targeted towards. And then my question is, if you have a certain age group you are targeting, what about the other age groups? Like, for example, if it's for teenagers, what about toddlers? What activity might be useful for them? So I'm actually more about the age group you are not doing than the one that you are doing. And then the other just fun question is, somebody mentioned the forest shower. I was wondering about an astronomy shower. How come we are not hearing about that? That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah. So you mean forest bathing and star bathing? I mean, yeah, we could do star bathing. It's basically, you could call it that if you like. It's a wonderful word. In fact, actually, that in Japan they have a word for that. In star bathing, starlight bathing is a word. Yeah, like forest bathing is a word that comes from Japan originally. So yeah, so in terms of the age groups, the book that I've just finished writing is aimed at 6 to 8 year olds, and I've written other books for adults before and about kind of more about sort of meditation and contemplating the universe on a bigger scale, but trying to angle some of this stuff for younger kids is quite challenging because obviously they'll understand less. If you want toddlers, having a toddler right now, our adult one is 3 years old. He doesn't really get to see the dark night very often because usually he's in bed. So that's that's a practical issue. Yeah. I mean, actually, also to address the question by Genevieve, actually, it's very interesting about having a gendered element. Some women don't even feel safe even in a group. That's true. And initiatives, I mean, I should say from personal experience, from the events that I run, mindful stargazing with an emphasis on mindfulness and meditation, I typically get about 80% women who come to my events, which is extremely unusual in the astronomy world. If you think about astronomy clubs, amateur astronomy clubs, stargazing groups, it's almost exclusively men, or it has been up to now. And I think that's part of the accessibility issues. I'd like to go to and find out more about astronomy, but my local astronomy group is full of men, white-haired men who are over 50, and they're all into like their tech and things. It's a bit of a limit. So yeah, I find it very interesting that a lot of women and younger women come to my events once you angle it more that way.
Chris, you want to comment on both the Rathodi and Genevieve's comment, and then after that we'll move on to Khonze, who has a question/comment as well.
Yeah, so I guess I'll say a couple of things. So I've just developed a Nature Connection for Families handbook. It's a list of 12 simple activities that families can do with their early years children in the perinatal period. So that's kind of anything up to maybe a year. Although we've got lots of little add-on activities. And as part of that, I couldn't help but slip in a nighttime activity. So there's one that specifically is done from the window rather than from being outside. And, you know, they're nursery rhymes and things like that that are about the moon or the man in the moon, or we've all got our folklore or narratives or tales and stories that we can maybe tell and pass on. And this intergenerational aspect of passing on, not knowledge necessarily, but what the night sky means to us, or maybe has meant to our ancestors, and kind of the morals of those stories, I think can sometimes be quite important. And also within the nature connectedness research, there's been identified this teenage dip when it comes to connecting to the natural world. And it up to about 8 or 9, it's as high as it would be if you were a 32-year-old adult, but then it seems to really dip. So there's something maybe going on that links to identity around connection to the natural world, and maybe the focus is something slightly different. So we're looking at the moment at that very thing around kind of whether we see a similar pattern with connection to the natural world at night, which I dare say probably exists. But the other types of activities that might bring in a range of different children. So I've just been running some studies and we've called it Night Watch. And then maybe there's some similar events where you are. So these are not just astronomy focused, but they do all other types of night sky activities, at least specific to the UK, bat watching and using torches to go and find invertebrates at night, because at least 80% of invertebrates come out at night in the UK. And what we found is that those night watch events, huge numbers of families that bring along their children with them, whether they're teenagers or whether they're really young toddlers. So sometimes it might actually be about pairing astronomy with other activities that make it seem family friendly. So I think maybe if we're going to bring in children, we bring them in with their families, and that might just be a way to do it.
Thanks both. Khonze, if you can unmute yourself and ask the question and comment that you might have. But also I think the question after Khonze's comment is to you, Mark, saying how would you angle it to include more women? So maybe after Khonze's comment, you can also address that one. Khonze.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. It was an interesting presentation. I think someone made a comment, or it was a question rather, around how do we increase, how do we make information on astronomy, stargazing, how do we make it more accessible? And I'm thinking more particularly for the South African socioeconomic context, where it's rural, there's high levels of poverty. And I think Kevin also mentioned something to that effect. I think one of the most important things that we probably also need to reflect on is, when we go into these areas and, try and introduce these concepts on, astronomy and as we find what are those neighboring communities using for mental health, and what types of assets, or how are they making meaning out of them understanding, mental health and wellness, and what are the different assets that are actually already available in the communities. Because one of the things that we found as we're working with a couple of colleagues on the outreach space is that in most cases, you find that there is some level of understanding of what the actual concept is, but it just has not been synthesized enough for us to actually call it, astronomy or, whatever the case may be. So I think that's something to definitely think about. And I would imagine, if I made an example, for instance, around the issue of unemployment, if a young person, we know unemployment in South Africa, it's called a wicked issue because it's multifaceted. And a huge part of it includes having low levels of mental health, which means you can apply for a job or you can underperform at an interview. So I would imagine if somebody experienced, some form of stargazing or night watching, in this particular context, may have some form of resilience, as they are experiencing this particular socioeconomic problem. But now, I want to say that a couple of days ago we had a full moon. So I'm a super grade 3 level knowledge when it comes to astronomy, but it's something that I have interest in, and I'm also a blogger for nature-based biomimicry stuff. So a couple of days ago, the kid said to me, Mom, come look outside. You should see the moon. It's so beautiful. And I literally had to push past bedtime so that we can quickly go outside and look at the moon. And so I would certainly say that really going through, family networks for, the particular socioeconomic groups, it can definitely be an intervention that can work. But now to my question, I know this is going to be quite long. I have quite a lot to say, but I want to say, I want to ask particularly Chris, the program that you ran, I think you said with the refugee children, it sounds very interesting, particularly when you assess the outcome side of things. I wonder what is your opinion when it comes to this particular subject as it pertains to the readiness of policy to embrace, these types of interventions as actual preventative and also as a treatment option for some of these particular circumstances. I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Okay, that's quite a lot to unpack in that last question. And, how does it relate to treatment and policy? And all I can say is in the UK, it's a very slow process. So getting it added and recognised as a thing. I was involved in an all parliamentary group just back on Tuesday around the impacts of light pollution on mental health, and not all MPs within the House of Commons are involved in that. Only actually a small number, around about 20, and they all sort of sign up to different things. So it's gathering momentum, but there are 500 MPs in the Houses of Parliament. So to have 25 is good, but we could be kind of doing better there. So I think there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of work that needs to be do to integrate it into policy and recognise the mental health benefits. As an academic, I see my primary role to provide robust scientific evidence that directly shows that there are some benefits of connecting to the natural world at night, and specifically doing simple activities like astronomy or stargazing. So I think number one is we have to try to raise the evidence level so that the policy makers and the decision makers will implement things like that, probably in each respective country, and some of us will have more challenges than others. Has that answered your question? Hopefully.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you.
So Mark has to leave soon. Do you have any final comments to sort of kind of get us to wrap up as well? Actually, there was a comment by Pedro which followed up on when you mentioned the fact that you do not own a telescope.
Yes.
So if you had seen the comment on the chat, so maybe you can just sort of kind of say something to that and then just wrap up, and then you can be dismissed.
Yeah. So there's, I dare say, for the many professionals, there is no or ever. I absolutely resonate with that. I remember a time I went to a telescope on Mauna Kea in Hawaii. Had a few nights observing time, and I was so excited. Like, go into the control room, all the banks of computers, plug in your laptop. You spend the whole evening, night, all excited about what you're doing. And then you stumble out of the control room in the dawn, bit bleary-eyed, go down to sleep, and that happened 2 nights in a row. And then it was months later I realized I had not looked up at the night sky once with my eyes, and yet I was in the most beautiful place for the night sky ever. And I think, yeah, I think a lot of, like, as I mentioned before, about numbing yourself, like, in order to deal with all these numbers and all had to just get on with normal work life, you can end up not really thinking about these things. And yeah, awe was not part of my scientific training. And I think it's a sad thing, like, you sort of, it's funny, isn't it? Why should, or, but I think science and intuition and feeling and emotions are not really seen as going together. And I think science is seen as being very linear, it's very stepwise, it's very logical and that kind of thing. And actually, where's the space in that for feeling emotion? I think that's where I think a lot of people live their life, not necessarily as a scientist, but just in that world of everything's very linear, very devoid of, or maybe disconnected a bit from the emotional side. So yeah, I mean, I haven't really got a telescope, but I find that looking up at the night sky with my eyes is way enough. That's enough for me to get that awe going. And I find I can lie out even here in London, even on a night where there's lots and lots of light pollution and clouds passing by. But if you can, in between the clouds, in between the light pollution, imagine a star is emitting light in all directions. It's a sphere, it's going light in all directions. Yet somehow there's one beam of light which was going through space all the way through, maybe hundreds of light years. It's been traveling through space towards our solar system. It comes down through our solar system. It comes down through the atmosphere, through a tiny little gap in the cloud or through the light pollution at that moment, and hits your eyeball in the center of your eye at that moment. And I find that's the most awe-inspiring moment. I have this connection with that star. I am witnessing that star through that tiny little ray of light which has been traveling for hundreds of light years through space. And I don't need to know anything about what star it is. And the clouds can just roll on past at that moment. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So thanks, Dominic. You mentioned in the chat there, we've made some guided meditations. The OAD was very kind to fund some meditations we recorded. Now they're available for anyone to download. Mindful stargazing practices you can do with the stars or without the stars. Yeah, and it's been absolutely wonderful to join in today. I find it deeply inspiring to be around people who are working in the area of stargazing and mental health communities, helping people to understand their place within the universe and things. And here we are in a whole group of people that are interested in this. I find it amazing, amazing, amazing. Yeah, I'm afraid I have to go because my wife has another appointment. I have to go and look after our 3-year-old. But yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I think thank you very much. Yeah, and I hope to do some more of this some other time.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, Chris. Yeah.
Chris, you have your hand
Yeah,
up.
yeah. If it was okay, that was a beautiful end from Mark there, and so I almost hate to say something additional, but we were speaking about that experience of awe and wonder, and I just wanted to share 2 moments with you, and one of them is actually not research, but kind of part of the outreach work I was involved in as I went to work with a local school, and I got them to process some astronomy data. So the data was free to access. So I'm talking about accessibility here. They were fortunate that their school had Photoshop, and so the reason I did this with them and I got them to process the astronomy data from galaxies and so on is because I remember my first experience. And when I took my very first picture ever of Andromeda, and I got 2.5 hours of integrated data, and it came out as after stacking, a single black image. and you could see nothing obviously there. And of course, then you have to work with that data in Photoshop or a free piece of software. I almost didn't believe that I was going to be capable of taking a picture. But then when I stretched the image and suddenly it popped out of the screen at me, and you could see the dust lanes of Andromeda, and you could start to see some of the colors working through, I audibly said, wow, I can't believe that I've kind of done this. So I wanted to recreate that children in school, and it was a magical moment for them too. When I got them to process and do a mineral moon, I got them to do Andromeda, I got them to look and draw out colors within different star clusters, the golds, the blues, the whites, and so it was a poignant moment. So I think when we're talking about recreating moments of awe and wonder, we can think more broadly than just being out at night and with a telescope. We can think about the full remit of what that might include, including processing things like astronomy data. And so the very last point I'll make, and it's a very quick one, is just that I think it's about creating moments that are special and stand out for people, and not necessarily the minutes or the length of time that we spend on a particular activity. So creating special moments are what stay with people, whether it be that they take a photograph or not. So I'll leave it there, if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Chris. I feel like I saw too many heads nodding, and I'm just like, Charles, clearly you have a lot to share with us. Can you wrap up the session? And just like, summarize for us what was discussed today, and what do you think would be an ideal way to move forward?
I don't think I can summarize what was discussed because quite a lot. And I think, clearly, we can sort of use, what we've discussed here today in so many different ways, I think, the earlier suggestion was, can we come up with a, project, an idea that we can move forward with? And I think, the stuff discussed here today, if they do grab someone's attention or interest in stuff that, they want to move forward with, they can always just reach out to us at the OED, connect them with Mark and with Chris, and see how we can, come up, with something, or also again with Dominic, if it's anything that can be incorporated into the Astronomy for Mental Health project, then we can also connect it there. Also notice that some of these things and ideas, when you're speaking about things like bringing in families, families into this thing, it's something that could also feed into something like what we normally talk about in astro-tourism, and see how we can also use these as activities that families can do together in the sense of tourism, and create experiences for them, because I think as human beings, experiences are what stick with us. And those memories that we create even at early ages, even leading up to our adult lives, are actually what ends up defining us and the people that we end up, being with other people that are around us. So yeah, I think that is all I can say.
Thanks, Charles. So all I can add on to that is that our annual call for proposals is open, and the deadline is the 31st of May. So if you are inspired to come up with a project of your own that you would like to implement in your respective places, you should feel free to visit our website, and you can find out all about the call for proposals. It's a small grant, but it can get you started to making an impact in your communities. And with that said, thank you so much for making time on this Friday afternoon to join us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend, and hopefully you join us in our next Full Moon Mashup. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.